Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we are engaging with, well, one of the most intense and frankly rapidly changing debates in modern medicine and ethics.
We
We're
are.
asking the question, is assisted suicide ever justified?
Well, it's a conversation that's moved really quickly from just theoretical to actual law. And as we dig into these sources, which, they range from global legal data all the way to deep spiritual analysis,
Right.
we have to get the terminology straight right from the get-go.
Absolutely. Precision is everything here. So what are the working definitions we're using?
So we're really looking at two main acts. First, there's what we call assisted suicide, or AS.
Okay.
This is when a patient gets the fatal dose from a qualified person, say a doctor, but, and this is the key part, they have to administer it themselves.
Got it. They're in control of that final action.
Exactly. Then you have euthanasia. Now that's different. That's when the physician is the one who actually administers the lethal medication directly.
So legally, there's a clear distinction in who's performing the act, but the sources seem to imply that the moral and ethical weight for everyone involved, the patient, the family, the doctors, it remains pretty much identical.
Precisely. At the end of the day, we're examining state-sanctioned, intentional termination of life. And our mission here is really to cut through the noise, using these sources to understand the core factors driving this trend.
From personal suffering all the way to global policy and even spiritual consequence.
That's right.
Okay, so let's start with the hard data. Where does this stand legally as of, November 2025?
The expansion it's substantial. In the U.S., you have 9 states now: Oregon, Washington, California, Vermont, Colorado, New Mexico, Maine, New Jersey, and Hawaii.
And DC.
And D.C., yes. All permitted under various deaths with dignity laws.
And what about globally?
It's across multiple continents. You have Colombia, Switzerland, the Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, Spain.
Wow.
And then in the Pacific, several Australian states and New Zealand have also adopted the practice.
That brings us to Canada, which the sources highlight as a really unique case study because of its very broad medical assistance in dying law.
Yes.
And we noted that Canada's law is distinct partly because it actually facilitates organ donation from these state-approved suicides.
And that framework you see has led to incredibly rapid adoption. In 2021, AS accounted for about 3.3% of all deaths in Canada.
3.3%.
Yeah. Now, the sources report that just 2 years later, by 2023, MAID accounted for about 5% of all deaths. Think about that for a second. That's nearly 1 out of every 20 deaths.
1 in 20. That is a massive statistical shift in a very, very short amount of time.
It is.
So with that kind of speed, are the sources suggesting that the eligibility criteria got looser, or is this just, rapid societal acceptance?
It's a bit of a combination, but the policy really drives it. That 5% figure makes assisted suicide the 6th leading cause of death in the entire nation. It just shows how quickly a legislative change can totally alter a country's mortality landscape. It becomes a routine medical service, which then drives public awareness and, of course, acceptance.
And that rapid growth pushes us right into the frontline ethical conflict. So what are the general requirements for eligibility?
Well, the requirements are strict, or at least they're designed to be. A patient usually needs to have a terminal illness or some incurable condition that causes intolerable suffering.
Right.
They have to demonstrate mental competence, make several voluntary requests with waiting periods. It's a process.
But even with all those checks and balances, the core ethical arguments are just fundamentally opposed.
Absolutely. The pro-AS stance is really rooted in autonomy, in dignity.
The right to choose.
The individual's right to choose the manner and time of their death. It's framed as the ultimate relief from suffering, from that loss of control you see in late-stage illness. It's all about letting them die with dignity.
And the opposing argument is so powerful because it really challenges the entire purpose of the medical profession.
It really does. Those against AS stress the moral duty to preserve life. And they raise serious concerns about coercion.
The idea that people could be pressured.
Exactly. The fear is that legalized AS could create this unintended pressure on vulnerable groups, the elderly, people with disabilities, the chronically depressed, to choose death, maybe because they feel they're a burden.
A financial or emotional burden on their family or even the state.
Yes. And this tension just gets magnified when you bring the organ donation component back into the picture.
How so?
The source material highlights that linking AS to organ donation adds this whole other layer of emotional complexity.
Right.
A terminally ill patient might start to see their choice not just as relief for themselves, but as this heroic final step.
Right.
a way to prolong someone else's life by donating healthy organs. It reframes the whole act.
Let's move beyond the medical for a moment and explore the philosophy behind this. Okay, let's unpack this. If we accept that suffering is a part of living, what does that mean for free will?
That's the central question, isn't it?
Shouldn't suicide, in that philosophical view, be the ultimate expression of a person's freedom to decide their own end?
That's precisely what the debate grapples with. What does it mean to live, and when does the burden of existence outweigh the value of life? But opponents, they immediately point to the famous slippery slope.
Meaning, once you legalize it for one reason, where do you draw the line?
Exactly. If AS is justified for terminal illness because of suffering, well, could that open the door to endorsing it for non-terminal conditions, things like severe chronic depression or dementia?
Which also involve immense suffering and burden.
A huge personal and financial strain. Opponents argue that normalizing it for one group just inevitably shifts the boundary for others.
And this leads us directly to the more personal, or let's say earthly, motivations. In our increasingly secular society, for the patient, the desire to be free from pain, the fear of being a burden, those are really clear drivers.
And for the family, it's just as powerful. I mean, they're dealing with physical, emotional, and often a profound financial drain. They might advocate for AS, truly believing they're ending their loved one's pain.
But the sources bring up a really crucial and painful point here. The potential for deep guilt and regret that some family members report after the decision is made. Why does that only set in later?
It speaks to the enormous emotional pressure of that whole situation. The sources suggest that during the crisis, the decision is often driven by a desperate need for relief for everyone.
Of course.
But once, calmer thinking is restored, the reality of having agreed to end a life, it hits. And that can lead to a deep, lasting regret. It's the difference between acting under duress and reflecting in solitude.
We also have to consider the facilitators, the medical professionals. Their motives must be complex, beyond just ending misery.
Extremely complex. While many are surely driven by compassion, the sources compel us to look at the system. Are there hidden financial incentives? Maybe profits from the lethal drugs, or critically, that push toward harvesting healthy organs.
And there's that chilling caution raised in the documents, the risk that the legal cover of AS could provide a framework for, well, a psychopath to operate freely.
It's a severe caution. The sources reference documented accounts of healthcare providers engaging in serial killing of patients. If the outcome death is legal, the motive behind that death becomes exponentially harder to scrutinize.
This brings us to the deepest section of our dive, the spiritual consequences. This is a topic that's often absent from these secular policy debates.
Right. The source material really shifts here, and it presents a very specific worldview where humanity is subordinate to a supreme design for life on Earth.
Okay, and in this framework, suffering and pain, they aren't just random.
Not at all. They're seen as integral to spiritual development. They're opportunities for the spirit to regenerate, to correct past mistakes. So in that context, choosing suicide is seen as a profound act of punishable obstinacy against that supreme design.
Now, this all relies on a specific framework, the law of cause and reaction. For listeners who aren't familiar, can you briefly explain how that law is supposed to work here?
Certainly. The law of cause and reaction, which you might associate with concepts like karma or spiritual justice, basically dictates that every single action, mental or physical, creates a corresponding reaction that the individual has to experience later.
It's unavoidable.
An inviolable law. And in the case of AS, this law is triggered automatically, and it affects the spirit of everyone involved, the patient, the family, and the facilitator.
So what are the specific consequences? What are these regenerative experiences that the spirit has to face?
For the spirit that chose to end its life, the consequence is future suffering. It will involve emotional pain, turmoil. They'll be placed in experiences where they have to face that same kind of existential despair again and again until they finally overcome the urge to escape.
And what if the facilitator's motive wasn't pure? Say, it included greed from organ harvesting.
If the motive involves conscious ill will, the act combines the negative reactions of murder with greed and egotism.
So it's compounded.
Yes. This would require 3 separate, burdensome, and painful regenerative lifetimes to balance that spiritual debt. The consequence is totally independent of what the state says is legal.
And finally, we have to look at these profoundly unsettling spiritual questions about organ donation and ASS. Does the soul, the spirit, just immediately sever its connection to the body at death?
The sources reference accounts from near-death experiences where people report hovering still connected to their bodies. This raises a really disturbing question.
Go on.
If organs are removed before that spirit's connection is completely severed, and this is done without anesthesia, could the discarnate spirit actually feel the pain of that surgery?
And what happens after the organ is implanted in someone else?
The source material suggests the donor's spirit could remain unnaturally connected to their living donated organ.
Wow.
This connection could hinder the donor's spiritual progress and also negatively affect the recipient. It complicates the entire spiritual journey for everyone.
So what does this all mean? We have this incredible breadth of data, ethical arguments, and this deep spiritual perspective.
Well, based on this comprehensive review, especially the overarching spiritual laws we've just discussed, the text delivers a very firm conclusion.
And that is?
It states that, for a prudent person operating within this spiritual framework, the answer to the question, is assisted suicide ever justified, should be a resounding no.
But the analysis doesn't just end there with condemnation. It offers an alternative path forward, one that's rooted in acceptance.
And this concept of acceptance is defined very specifically. It is not fatalistic submission. It's not, just gritting your teeth and bearing it.
So what is it?
The source explains that acceptance removes that immense inner pressure caused by the desire to control something that's uncontrollable, like a terminal illness. It's a psychological tool, one that modern psychology even recognizes as key for coping.
And what's the spiritual benefit of achieving that kind of acceptance?
It transforms the experience. The helplessness, the dependency on others. It becomes a critical learning opportunity, a chance to learn trust. And through that, to move toward that spiritual goal of love thy neighbor as thyself.
Right.
That deep, inexplicable calm that comes from true acceptance is seen as a kind of benevolent help that allows a person to focus on living, on making the best of the time they have left, and that is the path for the spirit's progress.
This has been an incredibly thorough and, I have to say, challenging deep dive. Thank you for guiding us through these sources.
It's clear society is grappling with the removal of historical guardrails. The sources note that the stigma once tied to suicide, like denying last funeral rites, served as a major deterrent.
A deterrent rooted in fear of condemnation.
Exactly. So here's the thought I'll leave you with. If current societal trends continue and AS becomes fully normalized, with all those deterrents removed, how might that fundamentally impact the ethical and spiritual pathways of the people making these profoundly life-altering decisions? That's a question we have to keep reflecting on.